From its roots in World War II to its role in shaping world events today, the CIA has been America's secret weapon and often a source of mystery. From orchestrating coups and infiltrating foreign governments to satellite surveillance and cyber espionage, the Central Intelligence Agency has been at the epicenter of world events, steering the tides of history from behind the veil. Welcome to East Wind Channel. In this video, we'll explore the agency's most daring missions, controversial moments, and how it impacts global politics. Join us as we dive deep into the hidden world of the CIA, uncovering the secrets and stories that have shaped our modern era. Let's rewind to the early 1940s. As the world was engulfed in World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt saw the need for an agency that could gather intelligence and support the Allies in unconventional ways. In 1942, he created the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, led by William Wild Bill Donovan. The OSS conducted espionage, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare, all aimed at disrupting enemy forces and aiding the Allied victory. But when the war ended in 1945, so did the OSS. The United States disbanded the agency, confident that peace had arrived. However, that peace was short-lived. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, quickly expanded its control over Eastern Europe, spreading communist influence across the region. A new threat had emerged, and the U.S. government realized it needed a permanent intelligence agency to counter this rising power. In 1947, President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act, creating the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, as well as the National Security Council. This marked the official birth of the CIA, which was charged with collecting intelligence on foreign threats, analyzing global risks, and conducting covert operations, all in a race to contain communism and prevent the Soviet Union from expanding its reach. In 1949, Operation Redsox was conceived. Named after the Boston baseball team, the operation had nothing to do with sports. Instead, it was a covert program aimed at infiltrating Soviet-occupied Eastern Europe by parachuting agents, many of whom were immigrants from those very countries. The goal? To gather intelligence, establish resistance networks, and destabilize communist governments from within. The CIA began recruiting Eastern European refugees and exiles, people who knew the language, the culture, and the terrain. These recruits underwent rigorous training in espionage tradecraft, parachute jumping, radio operations, and survival techniques. They were prepared to face the immense risks of operating behind enemy lines. The agents were motivated by a mix of nationalism, anti-communist sentiment, and the hope of liberating their homelands. Between 1950 and 1954, dozens of agents were dropped into Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and Belarus. Under the cover of darkness, they parachuted from modified aircraft, carrying with them radios, encryption equipment, and false identities. Despite the agents' bravery and training, Operation Redsox faced significant challenges. Unbeknownst to the CIA, the Soviet intelligence agency, the KGB, had been highly effective in infiltrating the networks. There were leaks and double agents who compromised missions from the start. Many agents were captured shortly after landing. Some were turned into double agents, feeding false information back to the CIA. Others faced harsh interrogations, imprisonment, and execution. The cost of Operation Redsox was high. Of the dozens of agents sent behind the Iron Curtain, the majority were captured or killed. The operation did little to destabilize Soviet control in Eastern Europe. Instead, it provided the Soviets with propaganda material to showcase Western aggression and justify their tight grip on the region. The CIA began to realize that the operation had been deeply compromised and that the human cost was too great to continue. By the mid-1950s, Operation Redsox was terminated. In June 25, 1950, North Korean forces have crossed the 38th parallel, invading South Korea and igniting the first major conflict of the Cold War era. The Korean War has begun, pulling the United States into a fierce battle to contain the spread of communism in East Asia. The Korean Peninsula, divided between the Soviet-backed North and the American-supported South, became the first real test of the CIA's capabilities in a full-scale war. With limited experience and a pressing need for actionable intelligence, the agency faced immense challenges. One of the CIA's primary objectives was to infiltrate North Korea to collect intelligence on troop movements, military capabilities, and potential weaknesses. The agency hastily recruited South Korean agents, many of whom were refugees or anti-communist sympathizers, to parachute or sail into the North under the cover of darkness. These operatives were tasked with establishing spy networks, gathering intelligence, and forming resistance against the communist regime. One notable series of missions, often referred as Operation Broken Reed, exemplified the difficulties faced by the CIA. Between 1950 and 1953, the agency sent hundreds of agents into North Korea. Lacking adequate training, cultural knowledge, and sometimes even the ability to speak the local dialects, these agents were ill-prepared for the dangerous tasks ahead. The human cost of these failed missions was staggering. The missions yielded little to no valuable intelligence, and in some cases, the misinformation received led to strategic errors on the battlefield. The repeated failures in Korea forced the CIA to confront hard truths about its operational practices. In 1953, President Eisenhower appointed Allen Dulles as the Director of Central Intelligence, making him the first civilian to hold the position on a permanent basis. Dulles brought with him extensive experience and a vision to expand the CIA's capabilities. He believed in taking proactive covert measures to combat the spread of communism rather than relying solely on conventional diplomacy. Under his leadership, the agency received increased funding and greater autonomy, setting the stage for more aggressive actions abroad. During this period, Iran was at the center of international attention. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had risen to power with strong nationalistic support and proceeded to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which had been under British control through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now BP. Alarmed by the loss of their influence over Iranian oil, the British government sought assistance from the United States. American and British officials feared that if Mossadegh remained in power, Iran might fall under Soviet influence, potentially shifting the balance of power during the Cold War. Allen Dulles saw an opportunity for the CIA to assert its capabilities. Along with his brother, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, he convinced President Eisenhower to authorize a covert operation to remove Mossadegh from power. The plan, codenamed Operation Ajax, was developed in collaboration with the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. The mission aimed to overthrow Mossadegh and strengthen the monarchical rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was considered more favorable to Western interests. Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, was chosen to lead the operation on the ground in Iran. The CIA employed a variety of tactics to ensure the coup's success. They launched propaganda campaigns to undermine Mossadegh's reputation and turn public opinion against him. Influential figures, including politicians, military officers, and media personalities, were bribed to gain their support. The CIA also orchestrated demonstrations and riots to create the impression of widespread dissatisfaction with Mossadegh's government. On August 19, 1953, the coup reached its climax. With the Shah's support, military units took control of key locations in Tehran. Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah returned from a brief exile to consolidate his power. Operation Ajax was hailed as a success by both the CIA and the Eisenhower administration. It marked the first time the CIA had orchestrated the overthrow of a foreign government, signifying a significant expansion of its operational scope. Following the coup, the Shah maintained a pro-Western stance, allowing the United States and Britain to regain access to Iranian oil. However, Operation Ajax had long-term consequences. Many Iranians viewed the coup as a blatant interference in their national sovereignty, sowing seeds of anti-American sentiment. The Shah's increasingly autocratic rule, bolstered by support from Western powers, eventually led to widespread discontent. After the success of Operation Ajax in Iran, the CIA turned its attention to Guatemala to counter perceived communist influence. In 1951, Jacobo Arbenz was elected president on a platform of social and economic reforms, the most significant being agrarian reform to redistribute unused land from large corporations to impoverished farmers. This policy threatened the United Fruit Company, a powerful American corporation owning extensive land in Guatemala. The United Fruit Company lobbied the U.S. government, portraying Arbenz's actions as a shift toward communism, a serious concern during the Cold War. CIA Director Allen Dulles, whose law firm had previously represented the company, gained approval from President Eisenhower to initiate Operation PBSuccess in 1953. The plan aimed to overthrow Arbenz and install a government aligned with U.S. interests. The CIA supported Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas, an exiled Guatemalan military officer, training rebels in secret camps in Honduras and Nicaragua. They launched a disinformation campaign using psychological warfare tactics, including the establishment of the Voice of Liberation radio station to broadcast anti-Arbenz propaganda and dropping leaflets to encourage opposition. In June 1954, Castillo Armas and his small force invaded Guatemala. Despite Despite military setbacks, the psychological impact was significant due to exaggerated reports of rebel strength disseminated by the CIA. This led to panic and a loss of confidence within the Guatemalan military. Under mounting pressure, President Arbenz resigned on June 27, 1954. Castillo Armas assumed power, reversing many of Arbenz's reforms, returning land to the United Fruit Company, and suppressing political opposition. While the U.S. government celebrated the operation as a victory against communism, the intervention had complex and tragic consequences for Guatemala. In January 1959, Fidel Castro successfully led a revolution that overthrew the government of Fulgencio Batista. Initially, the United States cautiously welcomed the change, hoping for democratic reforms and a stable neighbor. However, it soon became evident that Castro's vision for Cuba leaned heavily toward socialism. By nationalizing American-owned properties and aligning with the Soviet Union, Castro positioned Cuba as the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. This development alarmed the U.S. government, determined to prevent the spread of communism so close to its shores. Under President Eisenhower, the CIA began formulating a plan to remove Castro from power. The operation intensified when John Kennedy assumed the presidency in 1961. The strategy involved recruiting and training approximately 1,500 Cuban exiles, assembled into a paramilitary force known as Brigade 2506. They received training in Guatemala and Nicaragua, preparing for an amphibious invasion. The CIA believed that the invasion would spark an uprising among the Cuban population and military, leading to Castro's downfall. To avoid direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, the operation was designed to appear as an indigenous uprising without overt U.S. involvement. On April 17, 1961, the invasion commenced. Brigade 2506 landed at the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. However, several factors immediately undermined the operation. President Kennedy, wary of escalating tensions, canceled additional airstrikes intended to neutralize the Cuban Air Force. This decision left the exiles vulnerable to air attacks. Cuban forces, loyal to Castro and well-prepared, mounted a fierce defense. Contrary to CIA expectations, the Cuban populace did not rise up against Castro. After 3 days of intense fighting, the invasion force was overwhelmed. Over 100 exiles were killed, and more than 1,100 were captured. The failed invasion heightened tensions with the Soviet Union, contributing to the adversarial atmosphere that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. For Castro, the attempted invasion allowed him to strengthen his position, rallying nationalistic sentiments and justifying further alignment with the USSR. Undeterred by the setback, the Kennedy administration initiated Operation Mongoose. The objective was to destabilize Cuba and eliminate Fidel Castro. The operation was overseen by Attorney General Robert Kennedy and coordinated by CIA operative Edward Lansdale. Operation Mongoose involved a wide array of tactics. Agents conducted sabotage operations to damage infrastructure, including blowing up railway lines, bridges, factories, and power plants. Numerous assassination plots were devised to eliminate Castro. These included exploding cigars rigged to detonate upon ignition, a poisoned diving suit contaminated with toxins to kill him during his frequent dives, and even attempts to collaborate with organized crime figures to carry out the assassination. In the late 1960s, during the Vietnam War, the United States was deeply concerned about the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. To combat this, the CIA launched a program in 1967 called Operation Phoenix, working closely with U.S. military forces and the South Vietnamese government. The main goal of Operation Phoenix was to identify and dismantle the Viet Cong infrastructure, a network of communist supporters and operatives within South Vietnam who provided crucial support to the North Vietnamese. To achieve their objectives, the CIA and its allies gathered intelligence through informant networks and surveillance. They set up interrogation centers to extract information from captured suspects. Special units were trained to conduct raids, make arrests, and sometimes carry out assassinations of key Viet Cong members. Operation Phoenix was effective in disrupting some Viet Cong activities, but it also became one of the most controversial aspects of the Vietnam War. Estimates of the number of people killed under the program vary widely, with figures ranging from 20,000 to 40,000. William Colby, who later became the Director of Central Intelligence, was a key architect of Operation Phoenix. He defended the program as a necessary measure to counter a ruthless enemy that operated outside conventional warfare norms. Now let's turn to Laos, a small country neighboring Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through Laos and was a critical supply route used by North Vietnam to transport troops, weapons, and supplies to the south. Disrupting this trail was vital for the U.S. war effort. The CIA decided to carry out a secret operation in Laos to block the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They enlisted the help of the Hmong people, an ethnic minority group native to the mountainous regions of Laos. Led by General Vang Pao, a charismatic and determined leader, the Hmong were trained and supplied by the CIA. They learned guerrilla warfare tactics, sabotage, and intelligence gathering. The CIA provided them with weapons, ammunition, food, and medical supplies. They also coordinated air support, using planes to drop supplies and conduct airstrikes against enemy positions. The Hmong fighters played a crucial role in gathering intelligence and launching attacks to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Their efforts slowed down the flow of supplies and troops, which was a significant advantage for U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. However, the involvement of the Hmong came at a great cost. They suffered heavy casualties due to constant fighting, and when the war ended, the communists took control of Laos. A lot of Hmong people either fled their homeland or faced persecutions because of their alliance with the United States. In 1979, the Soviet Union launched a massive military intervention in Afghanistan to support the pro-Soviet government facing internal rebellion. This invasion was a significant event in the broader context of the Cold War, with the United States and the Soviet Union competing for global influence. Afghanistan's strategic location made it a valuable asset, serving as a potential gateway to the Middle East and South Asia. The Soviet invasion prompted widespread resistance from Afghan guerrilla fighters, known as the Mujahideen. Comprising various ethnic groups and factions, the Mujahideen were determined to expel the foreign forces from their land. Their struggle captured international attention, setting the stage for global involvement in the conflict. In response, the United States saw an opportunity to counter Soviet expansion without engaging in direct military confrontation. Under President Jimmy Carter and later expanded by President Ronald Reagan, the CIA initiated Operation Cyclone in 1979. The program aimed to provide financial aid, weapons, and training to the Mujahideen fighters to strengthen their resistance against the Soviets. Operation Cyclone became one of the most expensive covert operations in CIA history, with funding estimates reaching up to $3 billion over a decade, which is worth $11 billion in 2024. The support provided to the Mujahideen was multifaceted. Initially, they received Soviet-designed arms to maintain deniability, but as the conflict progressed, more advanced weaponry, like the American-made Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, was supplied. The introduction of Stinger missiles in 1986 was a turning point in the war. Mujahideen fighters could now effectively target Soviet aircraft, reducing Soviet air superiority and inflicting greater casualties. The prolonged conflict exerted immense pressure on the Soviet economy and morale. Facing a costly and seemingly unwinnable war, the Soviet Union, under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, withdrew its forces from Afghanistan in 1989. This withdrawal marked a strategic win for the United States in the context of the Cold War, and was one of the key factors for the collapse of the Soviet Union 2 years later. Throughout its history, the CIA has faced scrutiny and criticism, particularly regarding transparency, accountability, and the balance between security and civil liberties. Yet it played a significant role in the Cold War, influencing the course of history during a critical period. We will explore CIA's activities after the Cold War in another video, examining how the agency adapted to new global challenges. If there's a specific operation you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.